Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we'll be exploring peace and conflict. Really looking at how we view security and how effective these big international organizations actually are.
Yeah.
But first, why don't you introduce yourself to everyone and tell us what you do?
Well, I'm happy to be here. I've spent my whole career working on conflict resolution, and I often see parallels to the medical field,
Okay, interesting.
We diagnose problems, find the right treatments,
Right.
and ultimately try to reduce harm.
That makes sense.
But unfortunately, it feels like the world today is dealing with a chronic case of violence.
Yeah.
I think the focus needs to be on what we call positive peace, unleashing all that incredible potential that's currently wasted on war.
Okay, yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
So, a lot of people talk about the UN and international law, and there's this kind of idea out there that they're just not powerful enough, or maybe they're just outdated.
Yeah.
Some people even say, get rid of them. Why even bother? Why do you disagree?
I think it comes down to understanding the UN's core mission, right? I mean, their own charter states it quite explicitly.
Okay.
Their goal is to abolish war and establish peace through peaceful means.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. The real question isn't about how the UN is structured. It's about whether the member states are actually committed to upholding these ideals.
Yeah.
I mean, are we really living up to those principles we all agreed to?
Okay.
Because dismantling the UN, that wouldn't actually solve the problem.
Yeah.
It would create a dangerous vacuum
Right.
and potentially lead to a world dominated by a single superpower
That would be pretty scary.
instead of a cooperative global system.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like blaming the toolbox for a house that's built poorly when it was the builder's fault.
Yeah. Exactly. The tools are there.
Right.
The question is, are we using them the right way? I mean, that's the challenge we're facing.
That's a great point. So, let's talk about another interesting idea. The security dilemma.
Okay.
This idea that when countries try to protect themselves by building up weapons in their militaries,
Right.
they actually create the very threats that they're afraid of. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
But if everyone understands this idea, why do we keep making this mistake?
I think part of the answer lies in the psychology of threat perception.
Go.
The media and all the political narratives we're constantly bombarded with, they have a huge impact on how we see the world.
Okay.
They fuel this sense of fear and insecurity.
Right.
Imagine a leader saying, if we don't stop that conflict over there, the enemy will be at our doorstep next.
Oh, yeah, we see that all the time.
Right. That kind of fear-mongering, it creates this self-fulfilling prophecy. It leads people to accept higher and higher military spending on wars that might not even be necessary.
Yeah, that's a pretty scary thought.
Yeah, it is.
It seems like we're kind of easily manipulated by these perceived threats.
Oh, absolutely. Fear can be a powerful tool for controlling resources.
Okay.
And justifying actions that might be totally unacceptable otherwise.
Right.
I think it's super important to be critical of the information we're given.
Yeah.
And to really question whether these threats are actually existential.
Right.
Or just, manufactured.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that brings us to NATO.
Okay.
It started as an organization driven by the fear of another world war.
Right.
But now it's actively engaged in military interventions and sometimes even seems to go against its own charter,
Yeah.
like with the bombing of Yugoslavia. What are your thoughts on this shift?
Well, I think this concept of offensive deterrence is just fundamentally flawed.
Okay.
True self-defense should be about protecting your own territory, not projecting power far beyond your borders.
Yeah.
It's like the difference between building a modern-day Chinese wall, not literally a wall.
But a defensive system focused on your own land and, launching an attack on some faraway country.
Oh, okay.
One's clearly defensive, the other's offensive.
That's a really interesting way to put it. Yeah.
It is.
It's
I see what you mean.
Yeah, NATO's current approach with this emphasis on offensive deterrence,
Yeah.
it's intellectually flawed
Okay.
and ultimately counterproductive to achieving lasting peace.
Okay.
It just perpetuates this cycle of aggression and mistrust,
Right.
It makes genuine cooperation and conflict resolution much harder.
So are we stuck in this endless cycle of conflict? Is there no way out?
I don't think so, but we need to take a hard look at some of our basic assumptions.
Okay.
Starting with this maybe controversial question, could it be that Western culture itself is just predisposed to conflict?
Oh, that's a big idea.
It is.
Can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, Western thought often emphasizes, binary thinking dominance, the need for enemies.
Right.
It's that classic goodies versus baddies narrative
Oh, yeah, I see that.
that we often apply to global affairs.
Right.
This really contrasts with, for example, the principles of peaceful coexistence championed by China.
Okay.
They emphasize things like non-interference,
Right.
mutually beneficial partnerships,
Okay.
a win-win approach to international relations.
So you're saying we might be projecting our own anxieties and our cultural biases onto other countries.
It's definitely something to consider.
Mm-hmm.
The assumption that China is just going to become the next global empire
Right.
might say more about our fears than about their actual ambitions.
Wow, this is really fascinating.
Yeah.
It's amazing how this deep dive is revealing these unexpected connections and all these complexities.
That's the beauty of critical thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Challenging our preconceived notions and opening ourselves up to new possibilities.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of challenging assumptions, let's talk about empires. History is full of examples of empires collapsing because of internal factors.
Right.
Becoming victims of their own overreach and their own self-destructive tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
So could we be seeing something similar happening in the West today?
I have serious concerns that Western powers aren't recognizing their own self-destructive path.
Okay.
They seem blinded by ideology and groupthink,
Yeah.
Look at the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline,
Right.
the unquestioning support for sanctions, and the lack of critical thinking about the potential consequences of escalating conflict.
Yeah, that's pretty concerning.
It is.
It's almost like we're sleepwalking towards disaster.
In a way, yeah. Yeah.
So Europe in particular
Mm-hmm.
faces this risk of becoming the battleground for a conflict driven by U.S.-led NATO policies.
Exactly.
And they would bear the brunt of the potential devastation.
Right.
So this is all starting to feel pretty heavy,
It is heavy stuff.
What can we do? How do we navigate this potentially explosive landscape and prevent a catastrophic war?
We need to shift from fear-based thinking to constructive action.
Okay.
Peace advocates need to move beyond just criticizing war and focus on developing viable alternatives.
So instead of just saying no to war, we need to be saying yes to peace by actively building something better.
Exactly. You've got it.
Okay.
We need to tap into the power of imagination.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of asking, why is the world so messed up? We should be envisioning a better world and asking, why not?
I love that. That's a really good way to put it.
Yeah,
It reminds us that we have the power to create the future we want.
exactly. We absolutely do.
Yeah. So it's time to start asking ourselves, what kind of world do we want to live in?
Mm-hmm.
And then, start building it brick by brick.
That's it.
This has been an incredible deep dive so far. We've covered so much, but I feel like there's still so much more to explore.
Oh, there is. What else should we think about on this journey towards understanding peace and conflict?
I think one crucial aspect is this whole concept of neutrality.
Yeah.
And its role in international relations.
Right.
Does true neutrality actually exist? Or is it just an illusion in a world that's increasingly defined by power struggles and alliances?
That's a great question. And this is one we're going to dive into in the next part of our deep dive.
Yes, we are.
We're going to examine historical examples of conflict resolution. Talk about practical steps we can take to build a more peaceful future.
Yeah.
And maybe even challenge some of our own preconceived notions about what peace really means.
Right.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive, into this complex world of peace and conflict.
You really left us hanging there.
Oh, did I?
You said that Western culture itself, might be predisposed to conflict.
Yeah,
That's a pretty bold statement.
it is.
Can you
Yeah.
Can you unpack that a little bit more for us?
Yeah, sure. It's complicated, but let's dig a bit deeper.
Okay.
Let's think about the idea of self-defense.
Okay.
The way it's understood now is that it needs this offensive capability to
Okay.
strike back.
Okay.
And that could mean really far beyond your own borders.
Okay, so if I said my defense strategy is to nuke Japan if you attack me,
Right.
that wouldn't be real self-defense.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's an offensive posture, It assumes there's an enemy
Right.
and you need to hit them first.
Okay.
True self-defense should be about protecting your own land,
Yeah.
not threatening other people.
Okay. So What would like a more genuine self-defense approach look like?
Imagine like a modern Chinese wall.
Okay.
Not a real wall, but like a metaphor.
Yes.
A defense system that's just focused on protecting your own territory, maybe with less destructive power, shorter range weapons,
Right.
focus on mobility and density.
Okay.
It only comes into play if someone actually attacks you, not as some kind of preemptive threat.
Okay, that's an interesting way to think about it.
It is, yeah.
It's like having a security system in your house
Right.
versus sending drones to patrol your neighbor's yard.
Exactly. One's defensive, the other one is aggressive.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And this kind of ties back to what we were talking about with NATO and how their offensive deterrence idea is counterproductive.
Absolutely. NATO has really strayed from its original purpose, which was collective self-defense.
Right.
It's become a tool for projecting power.
Okay.
It's a mindset that's inherently aggressive and expansionist. It fuels that cycle of mistrust and escalation.
It seems like we're so focused on winning wars that we've forgotten how to actually make peace.
Well, the military-industrial complex, they thrive on this idea of a constant threat.
Right.
It's hard to justify those massive military budgets.
Yeah.
If people aren't convinced there's some enemy always out there.
It's like we're addicted to war. Even though we know it just leads to destruction and suffering.
That's a good way to put it.
And this addiction is fueled by fear, by propaganda.
Right.
And this deeply ingrained cultural...
Cosmology.
Yeah, I keep using that word, cosmology. What do you mean by that in this context?
It refers to the underlying beliefs and assumptions that shape how we see the world. In Western culture, there's this tendency to see things as binary opposites.
Right.
Good versus evil.
Right.
Us versus them.
Okay.
Winner versus loser.
That's like classic Hollywood, right?
Exactly. It's like a movie.
Yeah.
There's always a hero, a villain.
Right.
No room for anything in between.
Yeah.
And that kind of thinking, it makes it so easy to demonize others and to justify violence as the answer.
Right.
It's a really different perspective from, say, the Chinese approach to international relations.
Okay. You mentioned earlier that China emphasizes peaceful coexistence and win-win solutions. Can you talk about what that looks like in practice?
The Chinese approach is based on these 5 principles of peaceful coexistence.
Okay.
Mutual respect for sovereignty, territorial integrity, non-aggression, non-interference in each other's internal affairs, equality, mutual benefit, and peaceful coexistence.
So it's less about like forcing your will on others.
Right.
And more about finding common ground and working together.
Yeah, exactly. It's recognizing that we're all connected.
Right.
And global problems need collaborative solutions.
Okay.
Not zero-sum games where one side wins and the other loses.
This all sounds very idealistic.
It does.
But do you really believe that countries with such different values and interests can actually coexist peacefully?
I think it's not just possible. It's absolutely essential if we want to survive.
Okay.
We can't keep clinging to these outdated ideas about dominance and military superiority.
Yeah.
It's time for a new way of thinking.
Okay.
One that prioritizes diplomacy, cooperation, and working towards shared goals.
Yeah.
We need to shift from a culture of war to a culture of peace.
All right. I'm starting to see how all of this fits together.
Good.
But if peace is the goal, what can we as individuals actually do to promote it? I mean, the world seems pretty intent on conflict.
That's the million-dollar question.
It is.
First, we need to educate ourselves and others about the dangers of militarism and the alternatives to war.
Right.
We need to become advocates for peace literacy.
So we need to understand how conflict works.
Yeah.
The tools of peace building and how we can contribute to a more peaceful world.
Exactly. We need to challenge that dominant narrative that war is inevitable and start promoting a culture of peace.
Okay.
This means supporting organizations that are working on conflict resolution, diplomacy, nonviolent solutions.
Okay.
It means having thoughtful conversations, bridging those divides and seeking understanding.
What about things like sanctions and economic warfare?
Yeah.
Aren't those seen as peaceful alternatives to military action?
Not really. Sanctions are basically collective punishment.
Okay.
And they often harm innocent civilians.
Right.
They can also backfire and make conflicts worse. You know, like what happened with the Nord Stream pipeline.
Oh, you're talking about those explosions that damaged the pipeline carrying gas from Russia to Germany?
Exactly. That act of sabotage, whoever was behind it.
Right.
It shows how quickly things can get out of control when we resort to economic warfare.
Okay.
Instead of trying to cripple our supposed enemies, we should be building bridges, finding ways to cooperate, even when it's tough.
So the takeaway here is to shift our focus from adversarial thinking to cooperative solutions.
Exactly.
Even when we're dealing with people we see as different or opposed to our interests.
That's it. We need to recognize our shared humanity and let go of this pursuit of dominance. In favor of collaboration and mutual respect, we need to build a world where cooperation is the norm, not conflict.
This has been a really eye-opening conversation.
Good. I'm glad.
I feel like I have a whole new perspective on peace and conflict.
I'm glad to hear that. It's conversations like this, these deep dives into these complicated issues that can really spark change.
And that brings us to the end of part 2 of our deep dive.
Yes, it does.
But don't worry, there's still more to come.
There is.
In part 3, we'll be looking at the power of imagination.
Right.
Exploring some inspiring examples of peace building and discussing how we can all contribute to creating a more peaceful world.
That's right.
Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. You know, we've really been exploring some complex and challenging ideas about peace and conflict.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff.
But I want to go back to something a little bit more positive.
Okay.
You know, something inspiring and empowering. This idea of the power of imagination.
Oh, yeah. That's so important. And it often gets overlooked. You know, it's easy to get bogged down in all the negativity, the despair of what's happening in the world today. But as peace advocates, we need to remember that we have the ability to envision and create a different future.
It's like we've been given this amazing tool, our imagination, but we don't always use it.
Exactly. We need to shift our focus. Instead of just complaining about how messed up everything is, asking why is everything so bad, we should be picturing a world where peace actually exists. And asking, why not?
I love that.
Yeah.
You know, it reminds me of that quote by George Bernard Shaw.
Oh, yeah.
He said, "The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man."
That's so true. It's all about bold, creative thinking. Challenging the status quo. Rejecting this idea that war is the only option. You got to be unreasonable enough to believe that a better world is actually possible.
I like that.
Yeah.
So we need to be actively building the alternative.
Yes.
Instead of just criticizing what already exists.
Exactly.
But where do we even begin with something like that?
We start by really imagining what a peaceful world would look like. What would the institutions be like? What values would be most important? How would we resolve conflicts? Once we have a clear vision, we can start taking steps to make it real. It's like creating a blueprint for a new kind of society.
And there's so many inspiring examples out there to learn from.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All the peace builders around the world, movements for nonviolent resistance, individuals dedicating their lives to creating a more just and peaceful world.
They show us that change is possible. Their efforts, no matter how small they might seem, are helping to turn things around. It's about planting those seeds of peace that can grow into a more beautiful future.
You know, sometimes I struggle with feeling overwhelmed.
I get that.
Like my actions don't really make a difference.
Yeah.
You know, just a drop in the ocean.
That's why it's so important to connect with others who share your vision. There's strength in numbers. Together, we can make our voices heard and create a real movement for change.
Collective action is key.
Absolutely.
And we can't forget about education.
So important.
Teaching the next generation about peace building, conflict resolution, the importance of global cooperation.
We're the future. We need to give them the tools and knowledge to build a world where peace is the norm.
So to sum it all up,
we
need to shift from fear to hope. Embrace our imagination and work together to build a world where peace thrives. We have to remember that peace isn't just the absence of war, but the presence of justice, equality, and opportunity for everyone.
Beautifully said. And it's important to remember that peace is a process, not a destination. It takes constant effort, vigilance, and a willingness to challenge injustice wherever we see it. It's a lifelong journey,
right?
Not a one-time achievement.
This has been an amazing deep dive.
It has been.
We've explored some really tough, complex ideas.
We have.
But I'm walking away feeling hopeful and empowered.
That's the spirit. Remember, change is possible.
Yeah.
But we need to be bold, creative, and persistent in our pursuit of peace. Never give up on that dream of a better world.
Thank you so much for guiding us through all of this. Your insights have been so valuable.
It's been my pleasure, and thank you to all our listeners for joining us on this journey.
The conversation doesn't end here. Keep exploring these ideas.
Yeah.
Connect with others who share your passion for peace.
Right.
And never stop imagining a better world.
Never stop.
Every action, big or small, helps to build a more peaceful future.
Absolutely.
And don't be afraid to challenge the status quo. Speak truth to power.
Your voice matters.
Subscribe to our podcast, which is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear.